The IEC always did warn South Africans that they would need the right amount of funding in order to effectively put this bill into operation. With the regulations, though, that the IEC has drafted, they've said that they are going to, it looks at various aspects of putting the Act into effect, but it does not provide for details on how the IEC will enforce political parties to comply. So political parties are expected, according to the IEC, to provide information by April this month. However, the IEC has stated that there is nothing that can actually force political parties to provide this information to them. However, what I think is also very important to take note of is the fact that in the Constitutional Court judgment on the matter between MVC and the Minister of Justice, which was handed down in MVC's favour, the judgment does state that in the interim where there is no legislation that actually can allow for continuous and systematic disclosure of political parties' private funding, in order for South Africans to effectively exercise their right to vote, they do have the right to write to political parties and request the information, and the judgment says that political parties then are compelled to provide this information. So now, the onus has been on the IEC to make sure the bill, the Act is put into operation, and they've been clear about the fact that they wouldn't be able to do this before the elections. But there's still a legal obligation on political parties to provide the information if South Africans do request it from them. And if they do not provide the information, it means that they're flouting the rules of the Constitution and they're disregarding the right of South Africans to make an informed vote, and essentially preventing South Africans from effectively exercising their right to make an informed vote.
Clear enough to me. But then what the IEC also said when we spoke to them yesterday was that they have received quite a number, hundreds apparently, of submissions from people who have a say in how to proceed beyond this point. Now, one wonders whether that, in fact, won't be tantamount to usurping the role of the legislature, of Parliament, because Parliament did, invite submissions while the bill at that point was still being piloted through Parliament. What is your understanding of what the submissions the IEC says it has, and the role that is going to play in making sure that this legislation is implemented?
So Parliament drafted the piece of legislation, but it just gives a general outline of what would be expected. For example, it says that information that then political parties have to provide to the IEC has to be provided in the prescribed form and manner. Now, the regulations that were drafted by the IEC has given the IEC the power to give a bit more detail in terms of how the bill is going to be put into operation. I think that the fact that the IEC has received apparently over 5,000 submissions is quite significant to show that there's a lot of public interest in this. The fact that they're going to have to consider all these submissions is going to delay them putting it into operation. But the IEC, with the regulations, does play a very important role when it comes to looking at how the Act is going to be put into operation. And one very important aspect, I think, is of the regulations is when it comes to the forensic investigatory powers and the technical skills that the IEC is going to need. That I don't think is effectively given enough detail in the regulations, because already the regulations doesn't deal with Chapter 5 of the Act when it comes to enforcement. But South Africans are really going to need to be able to trust the IEC when it comes to how they're going to vet donors who also have to submit information on the donations they allocate, and political parties and the records that they're going that the IEC is going to receive from the entities that are going to be obligated to give their information over. So the regulations provides very important details. And another important aspect I think that South Africans should take note of is the fact that when it comes to the private fund that the Act establishes, this fund is going to have different monitoring provisions as opposed to transparency rules around donations that political parties receive directly from donors. So when it comes to this private fund, a donor can give money to this private fund, and then that money will be then distributed to all political parties in the national and provincial legislatures. But the big concern when it comes to civil society is that if a donor decides they're going to donate to this fund, they can request that their identity and the amount that they donate remains private. And the IEC then is going to have the responsibility to vet all the donors who make such requests for non-disclosure. And there's a concern that, that there's going to be secrecy surrounding, what they're going to take into consideration. And there isn't really enough detail in the regulations when it comes to on which grounds would the IEC accept requests for non-disclosure. Yes, they would have to consider, political exposure and perhaps cases if, certain donors have been threatened by a political party who's aware that that the donor is donating to another political party. But South Africans are going to have to be ensured that the IEC can be trusted when it comes to how they would consider granting a request for non-disclosure.